Hello, and welcome to week 9 in Introduction to Sociology. And this week we are taking on two chapters, chapters 15 on religion and chapter 16 on education. And just to point out that these, over the time that I've been teaching this class, I've had various textbooks, and these two get grouped together. I've even had a textbook. It was like a condensed version textbook, and they had religion and education as one chapter. And I think the way that we can sort of conceive that perception from the field of sociology is they both see these sociology sees both of these institutions as institutions of indoctrination. And this is not a negative or positive thing. I mean, obviously there's negative and positive aspects to indoctrination, but there is definitively within these organizations of religion and organizations of education, there are value systems that are being taught and are being essentially the indoctrination part is if you want to continue to be a part of these organizations, you kind of have to take that on a little bit, take on or at least demonstrate your understanding of those things and live accordingly. That's what these organizations do. They're voluntary, hopefully. No, not when we're young maybe, but when we're older as adults, these are voluntary organizations that we go to in order to be changed and set on a path, whether that path be one that's spiritual, that we'll see in religion, or whether it's a career path and the adoption of a value system associated with that career that we get from education. So let's take a look at chapter 15, religion, in our course book here. So I introduced, the idea of coexisting. We've seen lots of different religions exist out there. There's actually a website called Adherence, and it lists all the known denominations in the world, and 800, something like that. I can't remember. I haven't been there. Maybe it's 1,500. I can't remember, but a whole lot of them, different churches and denominations and different spiritualities and stuff like that. Just that level of diversity is absolutely amazing. And essentially, what we kind of go and we look at, what is what is religion? And it is something that anthropologists have determined is a cultural universal. All societies, history, and today have all had some religion or spirituality component to it. And it's sort of the line where science ends, and we need explanations for the things that science has not discovered, or the things that are going around us that are mysterious. And so functionally, it may have that quality to it of, well, as the creep of science moves forward, we see more and more aspects of religion not being the total explanation for things in the world. And yet, at the same time, that science and religion are not as opposed to one another as, is sort of celebrated in the media. There's actually been a lot of crossover there. I mean, particularly when we look in history, that almost all of the labs and universities of thinking and whatnot that were established by the church. And so there's been battles, certainly, and huge battlegrounds, like such as the creationism versus evolution. But all in all, the coexist kind of, not only should we get along with different faiths, but possibly get along with science as well. And I think that most people are probably okay with that. Now, one of the things that we look at first when we're defining and looking at the sociology of religion is the concept of sacred versus secular. Now, sacred means something is of a spiritual value that is beyond the physical manifestation of that thing, or the value system, or something like that. It's very, very important. It could be a text, it could be a place, it could be the golden rule. And these things, we could say those are, and we refer to those as sacred, as unchanging, transcendental. They're beyond the human experience, possibly dictated by a supreme being, unchangeable. All of those things become those things that are sacred to us. Now, we use the sacred a little bit more loosely when we talk about, hey, my time watching my shows at night is sacred. Nothing is going to get... That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, very important. I'm talking about most important. And that's going to come up in the quiz. I'm going to ask you to identify sacred things. And I'm really not talking about, sacred time or that place or that, whatever. It's things that have the most profound, things that you might risk your life for. They're that important. They don't necessarily have to be religious per se, but we do have sacred things that are in our lives. Now, in this chapter, when we take a look at religion from a sociological perspective, we're not in the business of determining which one is right. That's not the issue. What we want to look at is this is a social institution. It's individuals that gather together, groups of individuals that gather together, that have a culture of norms, values, and expectations, and material culture, including sacred objects, sacred times, sacred places. It includes that and has many times a transcendental quality to it, or spiritual, or even maybe supernatural quality to that belief system and to the entity that we call the religion. So we look at the functional perspective of that, and we look at the different perspectives. And the functional perspective, as I said, has a lot to do with explaining things that are not explainable. It also provides a value system to guide individuals' lives. So someone might be looking at their own life. They may come to the conclusion that they would like to have a guidebook because our life doesn't come with one. So they seek that. There's maybe some of us believe that there's part of us that is always seeking some sort of transcendental way to be in order to be one with the purpose of our being. And we turn to these kind of organizations to help us find those things. Now, of course, when you're looking at strongly held belief systems, and that gets in, you have individuals, just like government. Government can have its structure and its documents, but there's also people there, and people always will often mess things up. And so there could be power struggles, politics, economics, abuse, wars, all associated with religion as well. There could be those who are inside versus those who are outside, those who are inside that don't go by the rules and they're made outside, and those kinds of things that could be conflictual, and of course the differing opinions on what is true. So those are the conflict perspective there. Probably one of the most important areas that we look at when we talk about religion, however, is the symbolic interactionist perspective, the meaning that it provides to people. Now, positive or negative, some people can have had very negative experiences with religious people or religions themselves when they were at some point in their lives. And so religion itself can have a very negative connotation to it. And any sort of inclination toward that can have a deep meaning for that individual. On the opposite end, this could be the central aspect of their being. I know as a churchgoer that I know people, it's a very important part of my life. I know that there are some people that I go to church with where it is central. It is a lot of their life is there. And it's a very, very important part of their lives. So their world and their basically their sociological imagination is largely shaped by their membership in that organization. And then finally, we look at that postmodern perspective and we see the role of technology and communication in this day. The church that I go to and play at, we've been streaming our services online due to COVID restrictions. The number of people that can actually be present in the service have to be socially distanced, and there's a limit on the number of people. those kind of things. And technology has really stepped up as a way to continue with those communications. And of course, we have global churches, mega churches with, hundreds of thousands of members worldwide, TV evangelists. The way people communicate, you put yourself on, you can just look, operating within the world I'm most familiar with, you could send prayer requests around the world to different ministries all over the place. You hear the radio and all of that stuff. Technology is a huge part of that, part of the world as well. So, and of course, then we have where you're at, your personal place you're at with this. So when we look at the discussions and the quiz that I have here, the discussion is kind of, let's talk about this. Let's talk about where you are in terms of your own place. This isn't a conversion time. It isn't an altar call or anything like that. This is a where you're at with this. There is a fairly good amount of evidence that individuals who do have a spiritual aspect of their life tend to be happier. There's a pretty good evidence that although the wickedness of the world and the trials and tribulations of individuals such as divorce and crime and those things are not necessarily set aside by membership in a religion, but having that sense of community and support from individuals that are bound together by a sacred obligation can be a very powerful and influential aspect in somebody's life. So if you could share those ideas and try and, we're not here to judge each other. We're not here to say, who's right and who's wrong, but self-expression, and maybe in this discussion board we can exemplify coexistence. For the quiz, I talked to you about the difference between sacred and secular. Secular being of the world, sacred being something of extreme value. And I want you to imagine one of each. What is sacred? Define it, and then give me an example of something sacred in your life. Something that's very important, something that if it's an object, it's something you would run into the burning building for. People notwithstanding, obviously our children are sacred to us, maybe even our pets. So let's bypass that and let's go into, is there something in your world? Is there a picture that you would not want to lose? Or is there a value that you hold, that is something very important? But I want you to be very, very, very precise, and I want you to be very careful about that. These are unchangeable, uncontestable things. So I really want you to get in touch with that limited quality of what is sacred. Everything else is secular. So I want you to define both of those and give me an example. Make sure that those are both included in your answer. And then we move on to education. Of course, one of my favorite topics. Here you are participating in this institution of learning. I start off with a history of education. What has it been? It's basically, when we think about the original story in this course about the shoemakers, is if we think about Mr. Shoemaker having all these machines and not enough time to train everybody to go into if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're going to have to go way back in the textbook, in the course book, to look at the shoemaker story. And but Mr. Shoemaker owns a whole factory full of machines. He's hiring people to come in. He doesn't have time to train all these people. He needs a literate workforce. And the Industrial Revolution made us realize that. I'm truncating the whole history of education here, but essentially we need people reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? The 3 R's. We need those because they make good workers. So public education became a necessity because of the Industrial Revolution. And then we evolved from there in terms of the fields of education. Now, I go into different, hot topics about education, technology. I mean, what has happened here at KV with the COVID? whether or not government gets involved in the curriculum and those kinds of things, the need for religion, the need for education, the need for some sort of system of indoctrination in terms of science versus mythology, science versus religion, or science versus folklore, and stuff to bring society forward. As industries change, we need people to be flexible thinkers and creative thinkers and dynamic problem solvers. And we compress that into this process of education to prepare people for a world that is changing more and more rapidly. I guess I can't say it any more than that. I mean, it's the need for education is more important than ever. And so in that regard, I'm going to again, and just as we might focus on the symbolic interactionist perspective of religion, I want you to take the symbolic interactionist perspective on education. But I want you specific to KVCC. Reading all that, we talked about the importance of education, where it's come from, why we have community colleges and public colleges and, and all that stuff. What does it mean to you to go to KVCC? What's it going to mean to you to be a graduate? What does it mean to have that degree, that diploma at the end, or the certificate that you're here for? And what does that mean? So reflecting on that, sharing that with your peers, the economic factor of coming to KVCC versus another pathway that you might have done. Why did you pick KV? What do you like about KV? What do you hate about KV? What are your opinions about this whole distance learning thing? Let it all out. Let's get our symbolic meanings out onto the discussion boards and share what KVCC means to us. So there's our chapters. Make sure, I'm going through this really quickly, so make sure you're reading all this stuff. It's not enough just to listen to me here. Read all this stuff. Read the stuff in the textbook and read the course book for detail. And I will see you in the discussion boards.